funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by viewers like you.
This week on New Mexico in Focus, a chaotic end to the regular session at the Roundhouse. We'll break down what passed and what didn't. Plus,
all you can do is hope, but it's still a very frightening situation.
The legacy of uranium mining and contamination in New Mexico from the perspective of an indigenous artist. New Mexico in Focus starts now. Thanks for joining us this week. I'm your host, Gene Grant. After a month of work at the Capitol, the regular session has come to an end. It was a frantic end, including an all-nighter for the House, and one that resulted in many of the governor's top priority issues making it across the finish line. Now, we're dedicating much of today's show to dissecting what happened to some of the governor's key items, like the Voting Rights Act, Hydrogen Hub Development Act, and pretrial detention. That's along with some of the successes of the session, including a historic budget with pay raises for teachers and other public employees. We'll also hear from correspondent Antonia Gonzalez later in the show as she explores the difficult history of Indian boarding schools in New Mexico. That's at the bottom of the hour. But we start with our line opinion panel and those developments in Santa Fe. Welcome to our three-line panelists this week. First, let's say hello to Las Cruces Sun News reporter Algernon Damasa. Good to see you, my friend. You joined us at the start of the session as well. We also welcome back Trip Jennings. He's executive director at New Mexico In Depth. Good to see you again. It's been a little bit, Trip. Welcome back. And hello to another long-lost face, Julia Goldberg of the Santa Fe Reporter. It's been a while, but we're awfully glad to have you back. Thank you all for being here and rolling with all of this last-minute news from the Capitol. We're going to start out by talking about what lawmakers have passed in the session. It took some procedural wrangling in both chambers, but the governor can claim several victories in this 30-day session. But some of her other top priorities will have to wait until a future year. We'll talk about all of that in a little over 20 minutes. For now, let's focus on what made it to Michelle Lujan Grisham's desk. The biggest headline being a nearly $8.5 billion budget. Despite other failures, wasn't this the main priority, Trip, of the whole thing? Got to get that budget passed. Was there supposed to be a bigger fight about this in your mind?
No, I mean, some of the fights were in some of obviously this is the biggest bill they have to pass every 30-day session. Mm-hmm. But, the fights were in some of the language, around, they tried to sneak in Hydrogen Hub Act stuff into the bill, the budget, and that was taken out at the last minute. There were a little kind of like wrangling in the back rooms over this. I don't think there was a huge fight because, they put a lot of money into the reserves, mm-hmm. and they have so much money this year that I think I didn't see a really huge fight. Mm-hmm. Some of my panelists would disagree.
It's an interesting point, Julia Goldberg. It's a big increase from any budgets we've ever had, but one of the big talking points in the budget is more money for public employees like teachers. How important was it for Democrats to get this passed, both for the people it impacts, certainly, but also heading into the midterms?
Sure. I mean, certainly, I think the last thing they wanted was to come out of this session looking like they couldn't get anything done, even when they're flush with money. Because if you can't do it then, when can you do it? And then given the crisis, the teacher vacancy crisis, I think getting that through was probably the most important thing for the governor to be able to say was accomplished. I still have questions about the how the actual budget recommendation for the state equalization guarantee, because there seem to be different numbers about what it's going to cost to implement those raises, but I'm sure they'll figure it out at some point.
That's a good point, right? At some point. That's an interesting point there. Algernon, the revised budget plan includes $55 million for bonuses intended to help recruit and retain law enforcement officers. And interestingly, that's a lot higher than the original $13 million originally proposed by the governor. Was that increase a makeup of sorts as it became more clear the other anti-crime legislation wasn't going to make it through?
Well, we can't forget that it's an election year and crime has been very much part of the agenda, as well as trying to signal strong support for law enforcement officers who have in some ways been crying foul and crying for help for a couple of years now. And so that investment seemed very important. And I also think alongside the budget bill, something that hasn't gotten as much fanfare because of all the other sort of big headlines that have come out of it is that we got a larger than usual capital outlay this year. A lot of projects and a lot of money moved around. Especially one thing to notice is that a lot of money that had been devoted to public school outlays got transferred to the maintenance fund so that we can actually clean and repair and maintain some of the buildings that we've recently built. And that's another big investment that we're going to be seeing. So I didn't want to just run away from law enforcement, but besides the budget bill, that was also an actual increased investment that we saw out of this session.
Tripp, capping interest rates on storefront loans at 36% was anything but a slam dunk, but lawmakers ended up passing that limit after years and years and years and years of trying. Were you surprised that all that, that it got done this year in the middle of all this other stuff?
Yesterday, my jaw was dropped when I saw that, because as I was telling before, we started this, I remember writing about this back in 2007, and then, Think New Mexico kind of posted on Twitter that this has been around for at least since 1999. It's never gotten through. The lobby for the industry has been incredibly powerful. And so I saw it, as part of it's moving through the legislature. There's going to be another year where it might make it close, but it's not going to make it through. And when they passed it, that's a huge surprise actually for me.
Julia Goldberg, what do you make of the compromise to move the implementation back a year?
I think it's just that. It's a compromise. And I mean, as Tripp was saying, I think the governor choosing to make this one of her agenda items helped move the needle on this longstanding problem. And important to remember, too, that Think New Mexico, which was such a force behind it, this is a piece of a larger framework that has to do with retirement security in New Mexico. And, when I spoke with Fred Nathan, probably already 2 years ago on this, he told me that 62% of New Mexicans don't have anything saved for retirement at all. And 80% have $10,000 or less. So if you look at it in the big picture, I think pushing it back for a year doesn't make that much, is not that impactful, because you're really talking about one piece of trying to look at a much larger problem. So this is a big victory, but I think it's sort of the beginning of addressing a really systemic issue.
You mentioned, I appreciate you mentioning this, because it fits in with the governor also getting her wish on eliminating the tax on Social Security. But then also, again, she did push it through the gross receipts tax cut as well. Do those add, Julia, to the understanding that she really got something of substance here on this in this package?
Yeah, I mean, tax reform isn't probably the sexiest issue during an election year when you start getting into the weeds of it. And certainly, I think more than one lawmaker pointed out that this was a kind of confusing way to deal with tax policy, sort of piecemeal. But both the predatory lending piece and the Social Security issue, those are not brand new problems that haven't been studied. The analysis wasn't slapdash. They knew these were the right pieces to go. And I think certainly for seniors who, as I understand it, vote, it's going to be a welcome decision.
Algernon, we got a new child tax credit in there too. Again, when you start to look at this closer, does the package look a little bit better on closer inspection?
Well, we're going to see. Tax policy is complicated, and it involves in things like a child tax credit and some of these other tax incentives and credits that have been passed this session. We're really going to see, we're basing it on projections of what the stimulus value will be, how much spending money, discretionary money we're moving into people's hands, and whether that's going to go into savings account or whether that's going to go into the economy. It's interesting, and I think we'll probably be talking about this quite a bit, but this was a 30-day session, which in even-numbered years is the sessions that are supposedly devoted to budgetary and financial policy. But tax policy is complicated, and trying to jam that, as well as all of the hundreds of other pieces of legislation, into a 30-day session, I think it's hard to do tax policy really well, especially when you have these bills coming late in the session, when the nights go longer, and lawmakers are trying to work this out on sleep deprivation. So we'll see. And I pour through the fiscal analyses of these tax credits, and I'm not convinced that the numbers are going to align the way they think it does because it's so hard to predict consumer behavior.
Excellent point there. Hey, Tripp, we got to go back to crime. There's no doubt. Again, it took a rebirth of sorts for a package of bills added onto a related bill as a 160-page amendment, as you know. But early Thursday morning, very early Thursday morning, a deal was struck. And included in the package is stricter penalties for some crimes, police recruitment and retention bonuses, new judgeships, including here in Albuquerque, creation of a crime for operating a chop shop, and expanded access to ankle monitoring for pretrial defendants. Is that enough? I mean, for critics that said this legislature were dragging their heels on curbing crime to the last second here?
When we talk about crime and then we talk about it within the context of elections, it's really going to depend on, where you come down. I think there will be critics who are like, this is not enough.
Yeah.
People who will say, hey, they got it through. Some of this other stuff was onerous on one end, and other people will say it's not enough. The governor really wanted to show that she was taking crime seriously, because it has been a major issue. I think that it's honestly, it's like tax policy sometimes with elections. You don't know exactly how this is going to be received as it goes to the election year. But I do think that this is going to be where she says, in ads, I did this, I also did raise teacher salaries. It's going to be about marketing.
Yeah.
So I think in some ways this is about, getting the word. She has something she can hang her hat on for re-election, frankly.
Mm-hmm. Julia, pick up on that if you would. This idea that the crime bill had so much stuff in the air going in, and then coming out of the back end of these 30 days, again, is it going to be enough for people to feel like something good has happened here that makes people feel safer, frankly?
I mean, just to reinforce what Tripp just pointed out, the Republican Governors Association group just unveiled this, 6-figure ad campaign solely based on the governor not being tough enough on crime. So this gives her something. The details of this bill I find very, I don't know how anyone could look at this and actually feel like, oh, this is helpful to anybody. The electronic monitoring, there's only electronic monitoring, correct me if I'm wrong, someone, I think in the second, the fourth, San Juan and Sandoval, the bill doesn't require it be increased anywhere else. It doesn't really require anything. It creates a grant program for pretrial services. It doesn't say when that should happen. It doesn't exactly say who's paying for it. It's sort of, so in general, even the analysis from the legislature says, the best way to deal with crime is to have more treatment, is to have this overall approach.
Mm-hmm.
This to me sort of, they chipped away at a couple of things, but I don't actually see how this is particularly helpful. Some of the higher profile details strike me as just that high profile, not necessarily substantive, but.
Good point.
Even during the committee process, the Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman, Senator Cervantes from down here in Las Cruces, he said himself that sentence enhancements, which got a lot of play in this package, he suggested that sentence enhancements don't really have much deterrent value and are kind of a feel-good measure. They allow lawmakers to feel like they've done something without actually addressing the issue. This is, Senator Cervantes is very candid about these things. And he said at one point, this is a near quote, he said, I know it's an election year and we do things.
Can I say,
Please.
Algernon is, we're all talking about the same thing, which is when we talk about legislative sessions in election years,
mm-hmm.
or even in out 2 years, you always have to think about how this plays in the election. And that's kind of how this thing probably was put together. That's part of it. That's part of the analysis by folks is how does this going to play in June and in November?
Yep. Good point there. Hey, I want to get some final thoughts on what lawmakers were able to accomplish during this regular session, during this 30, as Algernon mentioned. Let me start with you, Algernon, on that. Again, this is opinion-based, so tough to do with reporters, but out of what passed, should we be happy with the session in its totality?
I don't want to annoy you, Gene, but I'm actually going to sort of bridge our segments here, and I'm actually going to talk about how although some things did not make it to the finish line,
mm-hmm.
I think that lawmakers and advocates were able to really advance some conversations that will return I think there you're feeling the shadow of the election bill and some of the voting rights provisions, as well as election security provisions that didn't make it in the closing minutes of the session. But I think that's coming back. And I think that, in that failure, there's going to be a lot of energy and passion and perhaps some organizing at the street level to try to push that through in a future session. And I don't mean that that's not the only example, but I think that might be the loudest example of that. Sometimes, even if the bill doesn't make it to the governor's desk, the debate and the politics actually does have a positive way of moving the ball forward.
That's a good way to put it, Algernon. That's interesting. Julia, your thoughts on that? Should we consider this 30 a success for New Mexico?
I mean, I think that the bill legalizing fentanyl strips for drug checking is a really important bill. And I guess unlike other reporters, I'm happy to have an opinion. I was really pleased to see that it passed and that it passed easily, because that hasn't been the case in other states. It was a similar kind of amendment to Harm Reduction Act in Pennsylvania failed. I know there's other states that are putting it off because they're concerned about how it'll be perceived. But there's just growing research that this is really an important deterrent and a kind of modernized deterrent, moving away from sort of thinking of the drug problem as being one that's entirely around injections. And so I was pleased to see that it didn't get mired down in kind of a moralistic fight about drug use, because I think, a lot of it connects to the problems with violence. It connects to the problems with unhoused people. The opiate and fentanyl issue kind of spreads all across New Mexico's issues. So I think it's, not as fancy. It probably won't affect everyday life for you or me, but I think it was an important bill. So if nothing else.
I don't think folks would argue that, Julia. Absolutely. Trippy, your thoughts? A success, this 30?
I have three. One, in the larger education, K-12 education debate, there was a lot of backroom dealing with, New Mexico's 23 tribes having more control over educating their own children.
Right.
And actually, they got a lot more money in the Indian Education Fund this year than they ever have. That was a big win for advocates from the tribal communities. Another one is this is something that wasn't paid attention to greatly, but there is a uranium cleanup bill that passed today, which is a big deal up in around the tribal areas in the Northwest. Huge. It's been around for decades. I said three, and it just dropped out of my head.
It'll come back.
I don't know what the third
Don't you
one
worry
will
about
come
it.
back. All right. Yeah.
No sweat. Thank you all for that discussion. We'll check back in with all of you in less than 15 to talk about all of the legislation that didn't pass and what happens next. But next, environment correspondent Laura Paskus explores the legacy of uranium mining in our state, just mentioned, and talks to an indigenous artist who was all too familiar with the pain and loss it caused those who lived nearby those mines. Here's Laura with Dehaven Solomon Chaffins discussing her exhibit Radon Daughter, on display for another week at the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center.
Hi, Dehaven. Thanks for being here with me today.
Hello, thank you for having me here today. I appreciate it.
So I'm excited to talk about your exhibit, Radon Daughter, that's at the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center right now. But I wanted to start with a little bit about you.
Okay. Well, I'm originally born in Fort Smith, Virginia. My dad was stationed out there in the Marine Corps. So that's where I was born. And then we gradually moved back to California again. That's where my dad was stationed in Camp Pendleton. But then periodically we'd go back to Laguna Pueblo and stay with my family out there. That was my grandparents and my uncles. So I really enjoyed that part because, you get to see the different, the aspects of how living like culturally and then living often on the reservation, I guess it would be. So I really enjoyed it, and but I enjoyed being on the Pueblo more so because I got to spend time with my, like I said, my grandparents and relatives.
So can you describe the landscape at Pueblo of Laguna, maybe for people who've never been there before, or like what that landscape especially looked to you like when you were a kid or growing up?
Well, I mean, what I remember and what I saw was just mesas everywhere. I mean, they lived in the village of Powati, which is located right in Laguna, Pueblo. And what I saw was just various shapes of, mesas and, cedar trees, and just really pretty. But then when I looked maybe to the south, I saw, the uranium mine, which I thought at the time when I was young, I thought it was more or less resembled a big ant pile, how it just tiered into one big giant thing. But I didn't, at that time I didn't know that's what it was. Later on, consider it one of the world's largest open pit uranium mines. And it was less than 1,000 feet away from where my grandparents lived.
Can you talk about what it was like to have the mine so close?
It felt like, just this man-made anthill, basically, just a man-made anthill out there. But when the sirens would go off, that meant like everybody would close their doors and, shut everything up, because depending on how the wind was blowing, the wind would come from the mine, and of course all the little particles and everything would float towards the pueblo. And so that's basically how I just saw everything. And then when the cloud blew, the dust would rise up, and it just seemed to me like a dragon, turning over in his sleep, and like kind of, why am I waking up? And this dust plumes come up, just like how the dragons would, have the fumes come up. So it was like that. It was just kind of almost a fairy tale in a sense, but then also the reality of, later on I would know the reality of what it really was.
I was reading about the mine. It operated from the 1950s to the 1980s, and so it's been closed now for 40 years, but still hasn't been cleaned up. Can you talk a little bit about the other the impacts that the mine has had on the community and people's health?
The impacts have been probably cancer, the main one, and a lot of illnesses that maybe we never really saw, or the people never saw. That was really kind of just traumatizing. Just taking, everything it saw, the trees dying, everything being monitored, now, like with the EPA. So it became very scary, But like I said, when you're small, you don't really see those things until you're older. And I just remember, people passing away, including from my own family, from things we never even heard of. So it was really sad and strange at the same time.
Through your pieces that are on exhibit, when people look at that exhibit, Radon Daughter, as a whole, what do you hope that they take away from that?
I hope they take away, I guess maybe in a sense, it's a warning. I would like to say it's a warning, because I know people had contacted other areas to see if they were interested in drilling again. And so I think there were boreholes, and I was like, no, we already went through that previously. A lot of people passed away, a lot of people are dealing with cancer, children with various illnesses. So it's not, I don't think it's a really good thing.
So this piece is called Radon Daughter, is that right?
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about this piece and who's here and where?
Okay, well, this is all the pieces that I have are reflected around the landscape, in the landscape of Powati, because of the man-made mesas. Some are there, just by nature, but some have been built, because of the reconstruction of the landscape. But this one, I had my daughter in there, and how she was looking out over the landscape, and how we had the clouds, the blue clouds in the background coming down, and with the rain, and then it kind of dissipates into, with the uranium coming up, or you mean yellow cake. That's the purest form of uranium. So you see them both collide in the middle. And then my daughter, I did an abstract image of her with the rain coming down on one side. So it's like she's looking over into the landscape, or a part of the landscape actually. And so that's what she's doing in this painting.
Hummingbirds make frequent appearances in your paintings. Can you talk about the hummingbird?
Yes, the hummingbird in most cultures is perceived as a good omen, and it brings a lot of messages of hope and happiness. That's what I've read, and of course I understand, but this one is on a personal level. This was, I think hummingbirds came into my life soon after the passing of my 2-year-old son, and it was awful. I mean, the whole aspect of it. He had been fighting a horrible illness, and later on, like at 2 years old, just succumbed to it. And my mom had told me that she, maybe 2 weeks or maybe a couple days after he had passed away, that there was a little tiny bird at the window, and he was clawed on and singing a beautiful little song. And my mom told me, she said, I called all your family, the rest of the family in. And that bird, for some reason, just stayed there. And he kept singing and singing. And so my mom, in our language, she spoke to the little bird, and she said that it was like as if the bird was telling her to tell my mom and my sister I'm okay. And she just believed it was my little boy, Sky. And everybody came in and they listened to that, the little bird before he decided to go, and everybody's in tears, and they just felt like, man, how amazing and how blessed and fortunate that we know that he's okay. So from then on, the hummingbird just played into a majority of my work, and I just felt like how strong of a presence he is. So with this image, here it is, you find, with the uranium and the mining going on, the hummingbird kind of like almost breaks apart. But yet again, he's coming together because of the rain. And the rain symbolism always brings, like he's washing away all the sadness. And he wants everything to come back together with the terms of rebirth. The landscape, animals, vegetables, trees, other plant life, that everything comes back together and is healed. So I always think of the hummingbird in this image, he's coming back together. He's going to be formed as one and go deliver his messages of, hope and whatnot. So yeah, this is another favorite of mine. So.
Well, thank you for sharing your art with everyone, and and thanks for sharing your time with me today.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate it too. Thank you so much.
If these were children that were buried from the white population, they would have a much different reaction than the children that are there, and largely it kind of is probably invested in just some of the racism.
Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham will have a tough decision ahead as she looks down the list of legislation that didn't make it through the regular session. Let's welcome back to our Line Opinion panelists to dig through it all and the impact this will have moving deeper into this election year. Let's start with the Voting Rights Act, which ran out of time when Farmington Senator Bill Scherer filibustered the last 2 hours of the session. Now, the House approved the new version of the original proposal as part of an amendment on a related bill, but in the end, there wasn't enough time. Now, could supporters have done anything different, Algernon, to get this thing done? Was there something in hindsight that could have been different here?
Boy, I'm not sure. And again, not to be a broken record, but I think one thing that you're up against is just the limits of time, and the limits of time can be weaponized by either of the parties, the majority or the minority.
That's
and
right.
So that's the thing. That's the wall that advocates just find themselves hammering their heads against over and over. So I'm not really sure. The only thing also is just that, on the theme of time, is just to really try to get the bills solidly written, because some of our committee chairs do like to work on legislation and really try to get into the weeds and the nuts and bolts of it, and that can add time to the committee process. And so if there's a way to really get some Brooklyn Bridge size bolts into your legislation, so that it doesn't get weighed down by technicalities, I think that's one thing. But the politics are hard to move on this just because of the structure of the process.
Chip, on this Voting Rights Act, I mean, it's got, Magatilus Oliver comes out with a victory. For the governor, I mean, how big of a deal for progressive voters might this be?
This is an extraordinary kind of larger issue. To Algernon's point, it would have been really smart, I think, in the interim to really build a consensus on this thing and get some bill that would have come out in the first or second week and then tried to push it through if they had wanted to do this. I mean, they did want it. Generally, expanding access to voting, which is what this bill would have done, writ large, generally helps Democrats. And that's when Republicans were using the call of the Senate, these procedural moves, frankly. And Greg Brandt from Rio Rancho used that effectively in the Senate to really bottle up the voting rights legislation, because access to voting has always been a big deal between the parties. And so I think in New Mexico, this is not like another state where, I mean, it's going to be interesting to watch the gubernatorial election and some of the other elections, but is this something that will deeply affect the elections and how the Democrats do versus the Republicans? I don't know, but it's not like we're living in Georgia or Kansas or someplace like that. So it's very interesting.
Interesting. I should be a little more clear. I mentioned it's a victory for Magatilus Oliver. Just getting it, to Algernon's point, getting it to a certain place, if not over the finish line, just getting it to a certain place could be considered a victory, Julia. But do you expect this to come up again in the next 60-day session? Is this going to be a big push for these folks who really want to see this happening?
I can only view this bill in the shadow of the 2020 election and with the horizon of the 2024 election. I think voter rights is so politicized, and it's almost just code for talking about everything that's happened on the national stage. So I agree with both Algernon and Tripp. I don't think this was ever going to get through. I think it could have said nothing other than we need to dust the voting machines on a regular basis, and it would have been held up simply for the fact of it being a voter rights bill being proposed by Democrats within this larger context.
Good point there. In terms of priorities for the governor, guys, we got to talk about this. Hydrogen was also at the top of the list. Very noisy, very loud. We saw several similar pieces of legislation surface before being struck down, one after the other. Now, first, will the governor call a special session on this? I'm going to start with Algernon. And second, will the outcome be any different in your view?
It's a fair question. I mean, it's the day of the Sine Die. The session is just ended, and there are calls to start a special session. And the governor did do that to get cannabis over the finish line. That's right. Last year. I don't know if this is going to rise to a level. The Secretary of State issued a statement that didn't sound like she was anticipating the governor might do something like that. We will see if this is something that rises to where we need to get a special session to get at least some of this done, maybe some of the protections for election workers, maybe some of the election security changes that they think that they can get enough votes on board. But it's going to be hard. And, as Julia says, I think that there's probably sort of a baked in resistance that would not prevent Republicans from using procedural moves to delay its progress again.
Yeah, good point there. Hey, Tripp, this hydrogen issue, I got to stay with this thing. Is it exposing a rift between Democrats here? I mean, it's been a wedge issue within the party itself, and not only not the only one. How could so many bills fail with such an overwhelmingly Democratic majority here? You got to ask a simple question.
I mean, it really does expose this rift over folks, who wanted cleaner kind of, hydrogen versus using the natural gas and kind of not holding up, but benefiting the oil and gas, industry in New Mexico. There's a real deep conversation here. To the point of a special session that might involve a Hydrogen Hub Act, they haven't built a consensus on this.
Right.
In 2021, they were not talking about hydrogen. They were talking about climate change, but they weren't talking about Hydrogen Hub Act. This is coming from the federal government, and this is a way of, New Mexico trying to get something in law that might be able to compete for federal dollars, is how I understand it. Mm-hmm. And it's going to take some time for them to really work with a lot of critics who were coming from the left side on this stuff. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was amazing how many folk turned out to say, this is not a good bill. We do not like this. So there's a lot of backroom kind of probably negotiating, and I don't think they brought the critics around from the on the left, the left of the Democratic Party. I say left of Michelle Lujan Bishop on this issue.
Mm-hmm. Julia, Speaker Egolf tabled it 3 times. I mean, something seemed disconnected here with this bill.
Well, yeah, and Tripp is absolutely right. It's the federal infrastructure bill, I believe, that has this built-in grant money that states can apply for. And so clearly this was this immediate attempt, let's set up this framework so that we can go get this money. But the problem, as Tripp has said, is every environmental organization in the state and the country has come out with very strong arguments against this as a form of energy. And these are normally, people who I think the governor is used to having in her camp.
Good point.
And there's certainly Brian Egolf's constituents. And so I just think it was a non-starter. There, unlike with cannabis, where so much of the groundwork had been laid and the objections that remained really were not based on much. And so they were able to push it through. This is one where the objections are pretty substantive. And I don't think the argument of, well, let's just get the framework so we can get the money is going to be very compelling to its critics.
That's right. It's sort of an old New Mexico way of doing things. Get the Fed money first and figure it out. Interesting. I want to talk about how we do these things in dummy bills and, the machinations of, changing pretrial detention standards, making it official. Should the legislators have seen the potential constitutional issues earlier on some of these things? Something doesn't seem connected here. Tripp, let me start with you on that one. So, how we're doing this, basically. This is a great frustration I get from people all the time. They look at a 30 and they say, there's no way we're going to get all these things in here. No wonder we're playing all these games that makes the public sort of lose faith here. Is that part of the problem here, all these machinations that the public's finding out about sometimes?
I mean, honestly, these games and maneuvers are going to be in every legislature across the nation and in Congress. I mean, there's a certain amount of procedural moves, intricacies that, one can use. I mean, the old adage is whoever understands the process is going to have power in a legislature, and that's true. As far as the dummy bills, not surprised at all, even though the Senate several years ago came out and said, we're not going to use these like we used to anymore. We're going to try to use them as in emergencies. The question around some of these dummy bills, especially around the Hydrogen Hub Act, was, is this an emergency? So, the public needs to understand that there's always going to be conversations in the back room and people having to compromise on something over, on something that their constituents might not like. At the same time, this might might bolster the conversation about a paid legislature, frankly. That's also part of a much larger conversation.
That's right. Let's talk about Brian Egolf. Can't hold off any longer. We just, news came out Thursday that he is resigning from his position as Speaker of the House. Algernon, let me talk with you. First of all, the obvious question is, was this a big surprise? Let's kind of get past that. Why? What do you suppose happened here?
Well, it does seem to have been a surprise to many members of the House, at the very least, and certainly to a lot of people observing it. Speaker Egolf seemed to be in a very powerful position, but also there's a lot of political pressure on him, ethics complaints that have repeatedly been filed against him to try to undermine his leadership, to dislodge him from his caucus. And he made this surprise announcement as the closing minutes were underway that he was going to spend more time with his family, which unfortunately mirrors the kind of joke that people say when people leave in a cloud of trouble. I don't know what the speaker has in mind or what is next for him, but it certainly came as a surprise to a lot of people today.
Trip, were you surprised?
Oh yeah, totally. I was sitting here I'm working out of my house, and I texted my colleague, and her reaction, I can't say it on a family friendly show, my kind of reaction too. I will say this: if this were a regular session and not a pandemic session, it would have been harder probably to keep the secret, because there have been more people in the hallways milling around, and secrets don't stay. It's one of those things where there probably were not a lot of people, and he might have been able to, but to Algernon's point, I have no idea what this is about, but my head goes, well, what causes this? What's the precipitating factor or factors?
Right. Hey, Trip, real quick, a favor before I get to moving on about Brian Egolf. We had an arrest of Georgine Lewis as well. Drunk driving arrest, as we know. How did that impact the calculus in Santa Fe? Did it come so late in the process it didn't matter? Or what happened there in your mind, if anything?
There's the public conversation on whether she should resign or not, because we've had other situations, with Richard Martinez and Monica Youngblood in the past.
Yep.
I had to cancel one of her committee hearings in a 30-day session, and this is in the last half of the session. I'm not saying that that's huge, but every committee hearing counts in a 30-day session. So as far as procedurally, I'm not sure, but I do think that there's going to be a public conversation around, one thing that I think about is it's unfortunate that this happens, but in the Roundhouse or any state house, there's a culture of, this is not about any one person, but there's an whining and dining of lawmakers.
That's right.
All this kind of stuff. What do you do with that kind of stuff?
That's a good point.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Julia, back to the point here. Sorry about that. For Speaker Egolf, you've covered him since day one. Were you surprised?
I was surprised, and I'm surprised by myself in the last few weeks. My cynicism guard seems to be down a little bit. I don't find it impossible to believe that Brian Egolf wants to spend more time with his family. Just having seen him over the years, he's pretty devoted to his daughters, and his wife is pretty busy with her business. I don't find it impossible to believe. I could probably be proven wrong by some horrendous scandal any minute, but I'm gonna believe him for now. That's true.
Anybody? Any predictions in the last 10 seconds on who the next speaker might be, by any chance? Julia, do you have a thought on that?
Not off the top of my head.
Javier Martinez was just elected majority leader. There's going to be a lot of jockeying. I don't know that he has a power base yet, but Tricia Lundstrom.
We shall see. That's right.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks again to our online panel, our line panel specifically, as always. This week, now be sure to let us know what you think about any of the topics the line covered on our Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram pages. The city of Albuquerque is reaching out to the public for stories and ideas on how to handle the difficult history of Indian boarding schools. This after the discovery of mass unmarked graves at an Indian school site in British Columbia last year. But what do we know about this history here at home? Actually, quite a bit, as correspondent Antonia Gonzalez learned when she sat down with UNM professor Theodore Jojola.
Dr. Jojola, welcome to New Mexico in Focus.
Hinuko Kimam, thank you very much for inviting me.
And you've done research on Indian boarding schools here in New Mexico. Can you share a little bit about what the purpose was for the Albuquerque Indian School?
Well, it really began when I was looking through some of the things that were passed down to be my family. And in particular, this little collection of boxes that had these little stray photos and negatives. And as I was going through there was this beautiful picture that was taken in 1937 of my mom, who graduated from the Albuquerque Indian School. And she was with my aunt and with my grandmother. So it was really at that point that I kind of said to myself, gee, what was that all about? We had talked about things before, but I really didn't know the depth of what the history of the school was. And consequently, I was actually given a contract to put an exhibit together by the Museum of Albuquerque. And in that, I was able to conduct a series of interviews with alumni from the school, all of whom have passed away now. So I had that amazing opportunity to be able to talk to people firsthand about their experiences there.
And what were some of your findings from some of the former students there?
The findings were pretty much consistent along the sense that it really was a place that people really valued, and in a way it kind of took me a little off from the standpoint of the fact that most of the things that you hear about the Indian boarding school experience have been horrendous, and we need to acknowledge and embrace that. But on the other hand, the Albuquerque Indian School experience was much different for a whole bunch of historical reasons, but largely attuned to the fact that they did have a direct connection with many of the tribes that of whose children actually went there.
And there are students from Pueblos, from other tribes here in the state, but also the Four Corners region. Were there students from other parts of the U.S. that attended the Albuquerque Indian School?
Yes, it was largely Pueblo, but that's because of the kind of regional influence of the school itself in terms of being situated and located here. But they recruited in Oklahoma, in Arizona. There were many different kinds of tribes, especially at its earliest origin. But by and large, it really was serving mainly the Pueblos, and then beginning in the 60s, largely as a result of the impact of Johnson O'Malley, there was a Navajo component that was attached to it. So in that case, a lot of the Navajo children that were brought into the city were actually going to the Albuquerque public school system, but they were boarded there at the Albuquerque Indian School, and they actually maintain kind of like two campuses side by side.
And now currently the city of Albuquerque is working with the Native community and tribes in the Four Corners on the burial site, which is located at 4-H Park near the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center. What has your research found about the burial site?
Well, sometime in the 1970s, for some reason that has still to really be clarified, a parcel of the campus was actually given over to the city, about 7 acres. And I think by and large, a lot of that was used to re-engineer the street there at 12th and Indian School. And as a consequence of that, there was this little triangle park that was created, which is about 2.5 acres. And it was within that where these early Indian burial sites are located.
And so the research that the city is looking for is going to include and make sure that the Native community is part of that. Why is that important to have tribes and Native community members involved?
Well, the biggest thing, of course, is just the fact that they need to acknowledge the Native children that are buried there. And right at this point, nobody knows who exactly was buried there. There was documentation that existed at one point, but unfortunately, we think that ledger that existed of these burials and the information there burned as part of the catastrophes that occurred in the campus when the buildings were burning down there as well too. So nobody's quite sure who it is that was buried there. But from what we can find in terms of just general evidence, a lot of those burials occurred right around the 1930s.
And what are some of the concerns that people in the community are raising, especially to care for it in a proper cultural way?
Right. So, of course, it's now the city property. And I think that this, in a way, is kind of raising some awareness in the general urban Indian population about how this, in a way, represents some of the kind of untold legacy of the impact of the Indian boarding system. And in particular, it's been very different by the kind of Indian boarding school in the region from where the boarding school was situated. I think the most atrocious examples of this exist in Canada, where the residential schools in particular have just shown this horrendous kind of situation where many of the children were buried as a result of abuse. And in the case of the Indian boarding school, however, many of those children probably passed away as a result of diseases that they caught. From what we can reconstruct, many of these were really at the time when there was a lot of epidemics like influenza, Spanish flu, all in numbers of those types of things. And it should be also added that, this is not the only site where Indian burial exists for these children. The Albuquerque Indian School, very early in its inception, way back in the 1890s, contracted the Fairview Cemetery, where they laid out 73 plots. And in those, there are some early records. They're not complete, but it did show evidence of the fact that children passed away there as a result of diseases, and that many of them came from places like Navajo, Ute, other at that time, places that were relatively isolated. And as a consequence of that, the people at that time were not able to actually transport the children back to their home communities.
And what do you see needs to be done in that area, or some of the recommendations that you would offer need to happen at the 4-H site?
Well, I think the biggest issue is just how has this area been recognized, and in particular, how to bring this sense of the sacred back into that landscape. Because right now, of course, it's just sown with grass. One of the things that is a point of hurt is the fact that when the city put the park in there and then they began to do the excavations for the sprinkler systems, they basically desecrated many of the graves without any acknowledgement and attendance to being able to acknowledge and protect the grave sites that were there. And then to this day, it's basically carpeted over, so nobody knows the extent of what the burial site is and how many children are actually buried there. By some estimates, people think it's around 30 or 40, but nobody really knows for sure.
And in general, when it comes to surveying a site, zoning, planning, and when we talk about Indian burial sites or even just artifacts or anything of that sort, how is that different or handled differently by cities, and should they be consulting with tribes, especially if they're in an area where there is a known cultural site among the tribal nations?
Sure, absolutely. I think you have to look at it from the perspective of if these were children that were buried from the white population, they would have a much different reaction than the children that are there, and largely it kind of is probably invested in just some of the racism and also the notion that Indian people somehow were artifacts in order to be studied, and that of itself is really demeaning from the standpoint of why it is that this site is neither acknowledged nor protected. Really the only thing that signifies the site is a very small plaque that exists there, and that was done, I believe, right at the time when the park itself was issued, and there's really not even a demarcation of that particular area. So people are wondering, why is it that people are allowed to walk on it? Is there some solution that essentially will acknowledge this and keep it separated as hallowed ground? Is that the sort of right way in order to be able to handle how it is that people would build a respect around it? But in a way, it's probably less about the individuals that are actually buried there, but the fact that this really, in a sense, is something that identifies Native people in general and, in a sense, acknowledges the kind of legacy of what the Indian boarding school itself had early formulated in terms of really committing and changing our people into what was called by the outside as the other. So from that particular standpoint, then, in a way, the burials are important and need to be acknowledged, but also the history needs to be learned by everybody so that they understand what has happened and what has occurred in terms of successive generations, in terms of this kind of impact of the post, I guess if you want to call it, territorialism of when this kind of education really impacted our communities.
And so what's next with the city and getting the public involved and recommendations? What's next for the burial site?
Well, they've had a series of listening sessions. I know that they've formed a commission within the city in order to kind of oversee and begin to solicit these recommendations about what might be solutions or what might be ways in order to be able to bring that story to bear. Right now it's still in the process of discussion. I know that they've also reached out to various tribes, probably the ones that are whose children are actually buried there, in order to be able to get that consultation going about, you know, how they would like to either do their own ceremony or pay respect to that particular area, as well as get input on what this place might be transformed into.
Dr. Hohola, thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thanks again to our line panelists for the solid reporting of what transpired during the session. Now comes the interesting stuff as the campaign for many legislative seats and the governor's desk are on the clock for the fall election. Now, how impactful this session is in the long political memory remains to be seen, but there is something to consider. I'm starting to wonder if this next election cycle turns out to be a classic throw the bums out cycle, where incumbents, no matter their stripe, are in for a challenge and a stiff one, because there's a hardened enough is enough statewide headwind out there. Think about it this way: are there truly any legislators without a law enforcement background who has made a name for themselves on fighting crime? More to that, does either party have an appreciable record on crime to credibly gap the other party? As you heard during our panel discussion, the crime omnibus bill has passed, but it's far from satisfactory given the size of the crime problem here. Now watch for the signs. About once a generation, voters just plain want to go in another direction, and it usually pilots a blaze as a result of inaction or not enough action on key issues, and this time particularly crime. And this cycle is starting to have that feeling. How that shapes up statewide into the final result is anyone's guess, but we'll just have to wait and see. Thanks again for joining us and for staying informed and engaged. We'll see you again next week in Focus.
Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by viewers like you.